Hello, hello, good night. It's nice to see you all, you beautiful people. Good to hang out with you tonight. Thank you for having me. So my name's Dom Mullins. I was part of Full Circle Expedition 2022, summited Everest with Full Circle. It was a great pleasure of my life. And I wrote a book about the experience, a memoir that includes some stories about my life and also some stories of other adventures. And so I want to take the time now to tell you guys a bit about the book that I wrote, a little bit about it. It's a lighthearted comedy, and it's also a dream come true for me, which is really interesting because I always knew that I would write a book in my life. In fact, when I was in kindergarten, my first teacher, she had asked every student in the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. And when she came to me, I initially said I wanted to be a Jedi. And she said, that's not a real job. So then I responded that I wanted to be a writer. And she said to me, I'll never forget what she said. She said, well, I guess you're going to have to live a life that's interesting enough so that people want to read about it. And the saga begins, right? So the very interesting thing about my kindergarten teacher, Miss Bernstein, that she'd said that to me, and she didn't know that several weeks before when school first started, and she went around the class and she called every kid's name on the roster. She said, Dom Mullins, Damon Mullins, Damon Mullins, Damon Mullins. And then she walked right up to me and she said, you, raise your hand. I was the only kid who didn't raise my hand because I was the only kid in the class who didn't know his name. That's very interesting. And it's because I grew up in a foster home in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from Brooklyn. When I grew up in a foster home in Brooklyn, New York, this is me in my second foster home here. And I didn't know my name on the first day of school. That was a name that I'd never heard. And Miss Bernstein didn't know that, in fact, about 2 years after that moment where she taught me my name, I would actually wind up auditioning for a ballet school program in New York City, Ballet Tech. I'm about a year older than this picture, and a woman, ballerina, comes to my elementary school, PS 305 in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, and she has all the kids in the grade line up on the stage, and she tells them, imagine that there's a big pond in the middle of this stage, and you have to run and you have to jump over it. And if you fall in the middle, then you got to swim out. Well, I swore I was a superhero when I was a kid. I mean, I thought I was going to be a Jedi when I grew up. So I ran and I jumped as far and as high over that pond, that imaginary pond, as I could. And I remember the way she exclaimed. And what happened was I wound up getting a scholarship. Me and 3 other kids in my school wound up getting a scholarship to go to a ballet school in Manhattan. And I went to that ballet school all the way through high school. And then after high school, I didn't end up becoming a ballet dancer, obviously. I found myself wanting to go to college. And so I joined the military. I signed a contract to go to the military in the year 2000. And I just happened to be away from New York City in basic training when September 11th happened. And I'll never forget that day. My drill sergeant walked us all into this room, and we all file in there. And by the way, I spent many years, trying to drop my Brooklyn accent. But at that time, it was incredibly thick. So in my unit, everybody called me Private Brooklyn. So we all file into this room, and on the television, there is a graphic of the World Trade Center being hit by a plane. And all the other Joes turn around and they look at me like, Private Brooklyn, what's going on? And I said, this must be a movie. But it just happened that day, that September 11th was happening. And this is how we were finding out about it, with the drill sergeant saying to us, well, some of you guys thought that you were going to go to college, but now you're going to war. And it was a reality of my life. And so here, I found myself in Iraq a short time later than that. And I did a year in combat there. The interesting thing is, given the early life that I had, going into the military gave me a whole group of people to trust and to work with and to learn how to be in a collective with. And after service, because of the social networks that I had through service, I had another veteran teach me how to climb, and that was Stacy Bear. Stacy Bear is a real champion to me for that. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. There's no way in hell that I would have learned how to climb. I could climb the hell out of some stairs, though. But it was really just the opportunity to be out there and hang out with the guys that was fun to me. The interesting thing was, I could do all of the difficult stuff of pushing myself through to the goal, or however long it was that we were hiking that day, or however heavy it was, the thing was that we were carrying, because I had always done that in the service. But the real benefit was the opportunity to hang out with the guys, the opportunity to hang out with people who I could connect with. And that was the real benefit of the outdoors to me at that time. But I learned some really cool stuff that took me really far and gave me the opportunity to travel to different places in the world and do cool things. And during this picture, I'm in graduate school and I'm working on my PhD. Things are looking up. I'm learning how to climb. I also found myself on a Denali expedition. That was around 2013, I believe. Somewhere around there, 2015. Climbing was a great pleasure to me. One of the things that I loved incredibly about it was just the space, getting the opportunity to just cherish the space and find yourself in the space. Spaces that you never would have even imagined existed, first of all. I certainly didn't. And not only did they exist, but you could be there in them. You could do cool things in them. You could meet incredible people, and you could build a whole skill set. So in 2015, I wound up climbing Denali with a group of veterans. And I've finished my degrees at this time. I'm a sociologist doing research on small group cohesion in the mountains of veterans when they come home from war. And a lot of things in this time are looking up for me in my life. A lot of things in my life at this time are looking amazing. Not only have I finished my PhD and I'm a professor at a university, but I had a beautiful wife. And I thought that I had it made. I thought that life was going to be pretty smooth from there. I guess the interesting thing is that how dynamic my life was, I never really had any time to think about the beginning. And all of the path that I had to travel to get to where I arrived to. And no one ever says what you're supposed to do when you need to slow down. What you're supposed to do when you need to take some time for yourself. When you need to take a moment. And I found myself at this time having to step up to a very important responsibility. In fact, the most important responsibility I ever could have imagined. And that was to become a father. And I can tell you, as brave as I thought I was, of all the things that I did, surviving in Brooklyn, fighting a war, fighting it out in academia, I was incredibly scared. No one ever says what you're supposed to do when you don't want to break the most incredible, most precious thing that could ever come into your life. No one ever says what you're supposed to do at a moment like that. No one ever says what you're supposed to do with all the anger that you hold inside. How could I even imagine having a child? And all that time I was just hiding how angry I was. I was afraid I couldn't even hold the child. I could push myself to do the craziest things that I could even imagine, the most impractical things that I could imagine, but I couldn't do something that seemed so simple for everyone else. In fact, I had to admit that I wasn't really brave at all. So how do I admit that to myself at a moment like that I'm not brave? Well, I didn't. Absolutely didn't. I pushed myself toward more challenges. In fact, the interesting thing is that climbing became an extension of that. A way to not deal with my fear was to push it on other things that made the fear more immediate. I could manage the fear in the moment of ascending some route or traveling over some crevasse. But these more pervasive fears in my life, I couldn't manage. And so I ran from them. And so I spent all that time building up my life, my education, through war, my relationship, and the truth is that in the end I just destroyed everything because I was afraid. And the worst thing of all is that within it, I also wound up really hurting the woman that I love. And I hurt her, I hurt her, I hurt her because I was hurt. And I hurt her because I didn't know how to move beyond my fear. And I pushed that fear onto other things. I pushed it on my infidelities. I found a taste for really extreme things in every respect. And so I cheated on her with women, with men, with transsexuals. I destroyed our relationship because I was afraid of allowing anything to grow. And the very interesting thing is that in doing that, I realized that all that time ago, when I started kindergarten and I didn't know my name, because I had come from a foster care home where that wasn't taught to me, that I had been terribly abused. And I was afraid in my life that I wasn't even a good person inside because of all the abuse that I had endured. And so no one ever says what you're supposed to do with all that. No one ever says what you're supposed to do when you need to take a break, what you're supposed to do when you need to slow down. And the truth is, I'm the last person who could tell you what you're supposed to do when you need to slow down. Because I just went faster and faster. And of all things, I find myself crashing this motorcycle. And then I take my bruised self and I try to achieve the most impractical thing, which is to climb the tallest mountain in the world. While I'm all bruised and banged up, but I always learn to push through, to push as hard as I can to get through the goal. And so I find myself at this moment in my life where I actually don't want anyone to be able to stand in my shoes again and say, no one ever says what you're supposed to do when you're hurt or when you're angry like that. Somehow, I want to help people find the answer to that question so they don't have to endure what I did. And so if you pick up my book, The Sad Machine, what it is about is how I rebuilt myself after I crashed this bike and I'm trying to climb Everest. And I'm explaining to you, and I'm explaining to me, most importantly, all of the stories of the things that I couldn't say, of the things that I was terribly afraid of. I would like all you guys to take the opportunity to check out my book, The Sad Machine. And please, I have advertisements here in the back, and I would like to leave here with none at the end of the weekend. Thank you.